Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'll be showing you how I make Salisbury steak. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. We're making one of my favorite weeknight dinners. This is a savory Salisbury steak recipe, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing you need is your ground beef. I'm using 93% lean ground beef. You could use a different percentage if you prefer. We're also going to add 1/3 cup of panko breadcrumbs. And a large egg is going to help bind these steaks together. Got some shell in there. That's why you never crack your egg directly in the bowl. Now, a lot of Salisbury steak recipes use ketchup in them. That's fine, but I prefer not to in my house. So instead, we are going to be using 2 tablespoons of tomato paste and 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. Hope I said that right. A teaspoon of apple cider vinegar, just a splash of it, and a tablespoon of firmly packed light brown sugar. Now these ingredients, what we're doing is we're essentially making our own mini portion of ketchup in the mixing bowl. So we're not using store-bought ketchup, we're just making our own here. So we're going to still get that same wonderful flavor, just completely homemade. Now we're not done with the seasonings just yet. We're also going to use 2 tablespoons of a coarse stone ground mustard. And for our spices, we'll use a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of onion powder, might have gotten those switched up, but a teaspoon of each, a teaspoon of table salt, and just a ½ teaspoon of ground black pepper. Now here comes the fun part. We are going to use our hands, gloved or not gloved, to work all of these ingredients together. Then we're going to form it into some steaks, our Salisbury steaks. Now anytime you're working with ground beef, you don't want to overwork the meat or you can end up with steaks that are too dense and too tough. So we're going to try to be gentle here, just sort of massaging everything together. I want to make sure that all of the beef is getting some seasoning on it, but I also don't want to overdo it. Just like if you're making burgers, you never want to overwork the meat. Now, once I'm satisfied with how everything has been combined here, I'm going to form this into 4 steaks, and I'm going to make each about a ½ inch in thickness. I'm going to try to get them to be all the same size. Now, sometimes instead of making steaks, I will make this into meatballs, and we'll have Salisbury steak meatballs instead. So again, you don't want to overwork the meat, but just like when you're making burgers, you do want to form it together well enough so that it's not going to fall apart when you're cooking the steaks. Once you're satisfied with the shape, just go ahead and transfer them to a plate and repeat with the rest of the ground beef. And I make 4, but you could do however many you would like. It's a little bit smaller than the others. Those will be the kids' steaks. Because I want these to cook nicely, sometimes I'll make them a little bit thinner in the center because that can take a little longer to cook normally. Just kind of put a little divot there. All right, now let's move over to the stovetop where we're going to add about a tablespoon of olive oil to a large pan. Turn your stovetop heat to just a notch above medium. And if any of you out there have any tips for really making your pots and pans shine, clearly I am welcome to hearing them because I just can't seem to get mine super clean anymore. They're clean, I just want them to look polished. So once your oil is shimmering, we can go ahead and add the steaks and we're going to sear them on both sides. Now, anytime you're cooking meat, you don't want to overcrowd it, or what you're going to end up doing is steaming the meat instead of searing it, which would make it look gray, just not quite as palatable. So you can do this in batches, and actually I'm just going to do 2 at a time. In between batches, I'll just add another splash of olive oil, that way they're not sticking to the pan. Now to get a nice sear, we're going to let these sit undisturbed for about 3 minutes before we check them, and we want to see that they're a nice deep golden brown color before we flip them. Now we'll cook them on the opposite side. At this point, it's not critical that the steaks are 100% cooked through because they're going to end up finishing in the gravy, but you want them to be pretty close. Once you've seared the steaks on both sides, we'll remove them to a clean plate and then we'll cook the other steaks. All right, once our steaks are all cooked, we'll go ahead and remove them from the pan. We'll set our plate aside and we're going to immediately toss in 2 tablespoons of butter, just using unsalted butter. We'll just scoot this around until it's nicely melted. And at this point, I'll also turn my heat down from just a notch above medium down to medium. And don't worry about any browned bits or burnt bits on the bottom of your pan. In a little bit, we'll be deglazing the pan, working them into our gravy, which is going to make it so flavorful. Once your butter is melted, we're going to add 1 cup of chopped onion. As you can see here, mine is cut pretty small. I like to have small pieces in there. And this is just yellow onion. We are going to cook the onion until it is softened and translucent. This usually just takes a couple minutes, like 3 or 4 minutes. And the onions are just going to soak up that butter. They're going to soak up some of the brown bits as well. I think you guys are gonna love this sauce. It's so flavorful. All right, once our onions are looking nice, as ours are, we're going to add our mushrooms. You're going to need 1.5 cups of sliced mushrooms. And we're just going to toss these in the pan and we'll cook them until they're nice and golden in color. You want them to soak up some of that butter as well. Now, fun fact, I don't actually like mushrooms at all. They are one of the few foods that I just really can't stand, mushrooms and olives. But I know a lot of other people like them and my husband likes them, so we're adding them to our Salisbury steak. The things I do for love. And you can certainly cut yours smaller if you'd like. I kept mine kind of big because it makes it easier for me to pick around them, but you can do as you'd like. Now, if your pan is super dry and you feel like your mushrooms are burning, you can add another half tablespoon or tablespoon of butter in there as well. I typically don't need to, but I just like to throw that out there in case your pan is a little hotter than mine and you're running into that issue. All right, these are looking pretty good for mushrooms anyway. So next we're going to take 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour and we'll just sprinkle that over everything in the pan and we'll stir until that flour is completely absorbed. And once it is absorbed, we're going to continue to cook it for like another 30 seconds or so because we want to toast it, which helps give this gravy a nice base and a nice flavor as well. I don't want to see any flour streaks remaining. All right, now grab your tomato paste. You need 1 tablespoon of this. We're going to add this in. And we're just going to cook this briefly because I like to caramelize the tomato paste a little bit for just a couple seconds, like 30 seconds or so. And now we are going to deglaze the pan. So for today's recipe, I'm going to be using 1.5 cups of beef broth. And I'm just going to slowly drizzle this in. And while I'm drizzling it in, I'm going to scrape the bottom of the pan because again, those brown bits, those burnt bits I told you about, flavor bombs, we want them in our gravy. Plus we want our pan to be easy to clean because evidently that's something I struggle with. Here we go. So I've only added about like 1/2 cup at this point, making sure that the bottom of the pan's getting nice and clean. It's not about cleaning it, it's about the flavor. And once I've added about half of it, then I like to add my other spices, starting with 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce, which I know it's not really a spice, but I add it here. And following with another 1/2 teaspoon of table salt, another 1/2 teaspoon of ground black pepper, and 1/4 teaspoon each of onion powder and garlic powder. I'll stir these in. And I will continue to slowly add the rest of my beef broth. Now, I think I already said I'm using 1.5 cups today, but if you like a lot of gravy, you can up this to 2 cups. There are no other changes needed. You'll always taste test for salt and pepper at the very end, but you can pretty much make it without any other changes. Just gives you more gravy. Now I'll cook this for a couple of seconds. I want it to start thickening a little bit before I add the steaks back. And once that gravy starts to thicken up just a little bit, I will return the steaks to the pan. And here's where they're going to finish cooking. And you don't have to worry about spacing them. You don't want them on top of each other, but it's not as important to space them far apart as it is when you're first searing them. Now I'll turn the heat down just a notch, just below medium, all over that medium range right there. And we're going to cook this, giving it a little bit of a stir occasionally until the gravy has thickened and until the steaks have cooked through, which should only be a couple more minutes now. If you want to be sure that your meat is cooked all the way through without cutting into it and checking to make sure it's not pink, you can use a thermometer and just check that it reaches 160 degrees. These look perfect, so I'm gonna go ahead and start serving them. Now I have some nice mashed potatoes here. I'm hoping to share my recipe for mashed potatoes with you guys soon. Let's go ahead and portion that out. And of course, I love gravy, so we're going to take some of that extra gravy. Try to dodge the mushrooms. They got smaller than I wanted them to. Oh yeah. That looks and smells amazing. So I can't wait to dig in. I really hope you guys enjoyed today's recipe, and if you try this one, please leave me a comment. I love hearing what you think. I want to know, do you want to see more savory recipes like this? Anyway, please leave me a comment because I love hearing from you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. A little bit of parsley on top. You could use the real stuff, but I don't have that right now. All right, time to taste this. So tender. I think you're gonna love this one.